If I had kept my mouth shut, Adrian Cole would be a memory instead of a man. That's the first thing I remember when I think about that night. The restaurant was glowing in soft amber light, crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors that probably cost more than my yearly rent. My feet ached from a 10-hour shift in 2-inch heels that weren't designed for survival, just appearance. I was 26, living in a 400-square-foot studio in Queens, counting tips to make sure I could cover utilities and community college tuition. Table 14 was different from the moment they sat down. For men in tailored suits, watches that looked heavier than my car payment, voices low and controlled. And at the head of the table sat Adrian Cole. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. The room adjusted around him. Other diners lowered their voices without knowing why. Even the manager checked on that table twice in 10 minutes. I was refilling a glass of red wine, $300 a bottle, Napa Valley, 2016, when I felt it. Not fear. Not yet. Just a shift. A current in the air. One of the men standing behind Adrian, supposedly security, wasn't watching the exits like the others. He wasn't scanning the room. He was watching Adrian. His jaw was tight. His hand stayed too close to his jacket. I've spent years reading people for tips, weddings, anniversaries, breakups disguised as celebrations. I know when something is off. And something was very off. I stepped closer to Adrian's right shoulder, pretending to adjust the table setting. That's when I saw it. A flicker of metal beneath fabric. A movement too deliberate to be accidental. My pulse started pounding so loud I was sure someone else could hear it. I could have walked away. I could have let whatever was about to happen unfold without me. I was just a waitress. Minimum wage plus tips. Invisible by design. But I thought about how calm Adrian looked. How unaware he seemed of the eyes fixed on his back. And before my brain could stop my mouth, I leaned down close enough for only him to hear and whispered, "Stay quiet. Don't move." He didn't turn his head, didn't flinch, but his fingers stilled around the stem of his glass. The room kept humming, forks against plates, soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. 30 seconds. Stretched into something endless. Then chairs scraped. Voices sharpened. The table shifted abruptly, wine spilling across white linen. Gasps filled the air. Security moved fast, too fast for me to fully process, guiding guests away, blocking sightlines. I found myself crouched beside the table, heart racing, breath shallow. When I looked up, Adrian was standing. Calm, unshaken. His eyes locked onto mine, not angry, not confused. Assessing. "You saw it," he said quietly, his voice steady like nothing had happened. I nodded because lying felt impossible under that stare. He slipped off his jacket and placed it over my shaking shoulders. "From this moment on," he said, low enough that only I could hear, "you don't walk home alone." And that was the moment I realized saving his life might cost me my old one. The restaurant emptied in under 3 minutes, like someone had quietly pulled a fire alarm only the powerful could hear. Guests were escorted out with polite apologies and tight smiles, management whispering about a private security matter, while pretending nothing unusual had happened. I stood near the service station with Adrian's jacket still wrapped around my shoulders, the fabric heavy and warm, smelling faintly of cedar and something darker I could not name. My hands would not stop shaking. I had served hundreds of tables in my life, survived Valentine's Day rushes and New Year's Eve chaos, but I had never felt the air change like that. I had never felt eyes tracking me the way his were now. Adrian dismissed the remaining staff with a nod that carried more authority than a shouted order. Within minutes, it was just him, 2 security men near the entrance, and me. The jazz music had been turned off. The silence felt expensive. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was steady, controlled, but closer now. I shook my head. "I am fine." It was not entirely true. My knees felt weak, like I had run a mile instead of crossed a dining room. He studied my face the way someone studies a contract, looking for hidden clauses. "Why did you warn me?" he asked. Not accusing, not grateful, just precise. I swallowed. "Because you did not see him," I said. And I did. That was the simplest truth. I did not tell him about the instinct, the tightening in my chest, the strange certainty that if I walked away I would regret it for the rest of my life. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint silver at his temples, the small scar near his left eyebrow. He looked less like a legend and more like a man who had almost made a mistake. "You understand that seeing what you saw changes things," he said quietly. The weight of that sentence pressed against my ribs. I thought about my apartment in Queens, about the cracked tile in my kitchen and the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. I thought about my normal life, small but mine. I did not ask for any of this, I whispered. His expression softened, just slightly. Neither did I, he replied. One of the security men approached and murmured something I could not hear. Adrian nodded once. Decisions were being made around me, fast and silent. He turned back to me and gently took the jacket from my shoulders, replacing it with his business card instead. Thick paper, embossed lettering, a private number written in ink on the back. You will not take the subway tonight, he said. My driver will take you home. I opened my mouth to protest, but he lifted a hand. Not forceful. Final. You stepped into something dangerous for my sake. I do not leave debts unpaid. The word debt lingered in the air between us. Not romantic. Not threatening. Binding. As we walked toward the private exit, I realized every camera in the building had probably captured my face. Every loyalist had memorized it. I was no longer invisible. Outside, Manhattan's night air felt colder than before, sharp against my lungs. A black car waited at the curb, engine running. Adrian paused before I got in. From now on, he said softly, if you notice something wrong, you tell me first. It was not a request. I nodded, because deep down I knew something had shifted permanently. I had saved his life. And in doing that, I had tied mine to his world whether I wanted to or not. The ride to Queens felt longer than usual, even though traffic was light and the digital clock on the dashboard said it was barely after 11. I sat in the back of the black sedan with my hands folded in my lap, staring at the city lights streaking past the tinted windows. The driver did not speak. He did not look at me in the rearview mirror. It was as if I had become cargo instead of a person. Adrian's business card rested against my palm, the edges pressing into my skin every time I tightened my grip. I told myself I would throw it away the moment I stepped into my apartment building. I told myself tonight was an accident, a strange story I would one day tell a friend over cheap coffee. But when the car slowed in front of my building, the driver stepped out first and opened my door. He scanned the sidewalk before giving me a small nod. Respectful. Alert. Watching. I climbed the narrow stairs to my fourth-floor walk-up with my heart still beating too fast. The hallway smelled like old carpet and someone's overcooked dinner. Familiar. Safe. I unlocked my door and leaned against it once I was inside, breathing in the quiet of my tiny apartment. 400 square feet. A futon that doubled as a bed. A small table near the window stacked with textbooks and unopened mail. My life. Ordinary and fragile. I walked to the sink and splashed cold water on my face, watching my reflection in the mirror above it. I looked the same. Same brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Same tired eyes. But something behind them had shifted. I had seen betrayal in a man's eyes and warned another man who ruled rooms without raising his voice. That was not something you unsee. My phone buzzed on the counter and I nearly dropped it. Unknown number. My stomach tightened. I let it ring once, twice, before answering. Hello. My voice sounded smaller than I felt. Did you make it upstairs? Adrian's voice was unmistakable. Calm. Measured. Close enough to make the room feel smaller. I swallowed. Yes. A pause. I could hear nothing on his end. No traffic. No background noise. Just silence. Good, he said softly. You will save this number. It was not a command delivered harshly. It was certainty. I do not need protection, I replied before I could stop myself. There was a faint exhale on the other end, almost like a restrained laugh. Everyone needs protection, he said. The difference is whether they realize it. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. The black sedan was still parked at the curb, engine running, waiting. Are they staying? I asked. Tonight, he answered. Because someone made a choice this evening that did not end well for him. And people who make those choices rarely act alone. My throat tightened. The weight of his world brushed against mine again, invisible but heavy. I did not ask to be part of this, I whispered. His tone shifted, just slightly. Not colder, not softer, honest. You became part of it the moment you chose to speak. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just real. Get some sleep, Lily, he said quietly. Tomorrow we talk. The line disconnected before I could respond. I stood by the window, watching the car below like it was both a shield and a warning. I had wanted my life to stay small, predictable, safe. But as I turned off the lights and laid down on my futon, I understood something with unsettling clarity. I had stepped into his world to save him. And now, whether I liked it or not, he had stepped into mine. I did not sleep. I closed my eyes and listened to every sound my building made as if it were trying to confess something. The radiator hissed. Pipes knocked. A car alarm wailed 2 blocks away and faded. Each noise felt amplified, like my senses had been tuned higher overnight. When my alarm went off at 6:30 in the morning, I had maybe slept 40 minutes. The black sedan was still outside. I saw it through the thin gap in my curtains while brushing my teeth. Same position, same silent engine. The realization sent a strange mix of comfort and frustration through my chest. I dressed for my morning class in dark jeans and a sweater, pulling my hair into a neat ponytail. Ordinary clothes for an ordinary life. That was the plan. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, the driver opened the rear door without a word. "I can take the subway," I said, hugging my backpack against my shoulder. He gave a small shake of his head. Mr. Cole's instructions. There was no arrogance in his tone, just clarity. I slid into the back seat, telling myself it was temporary. The city moved around us in streaks of yellow taxis and impatient horns. People hurried to work with coffee cups in hand, unaware that my life had tilted slightly off its axis. My phone buzzed again as we crossed the Queensboro Bridge. "Adrian, you are going to class," he said without greeting. It was not a question. "Yes," I answered. "Good. Routine is important." I almost laughed. Routine had left the building last night. "Is this how it works?" I asked quietly. "You decide what I do." There was a pause long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. "No," he said finally. "You decide. I protect." The words were simple, but they landed heavy. The car stopped in front of my community college, a brick building that smelled permanently of chalk dust and ambition. Students milled around the entrance in hoodies and sneakers. I hesitated before opening the door. "They will wait," Adrian added. "Inside and outside." My chest tightened. "That is not necessary." "It is," he replied, and this time there was steel under the calm. The man who failed last night was not working alone. I do not underestimate patterns. I stepped out of the car, feeling eyes on me even if I could not see them. The driver remained by the vehicle, posture straight, scanning. I walked into class trying to focus on the professor's voice discussing financial accounting. Numbers projected on a whiteboard that suddenly felt meaningless. Every vibration of my phone made my stomach drop. At noon, I gave up pretending and stepped into the hallway. I dialed the number on his card. He answered on the first ring. "You said we would talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We are talking," he replied. "No," I corrected softly. "We are not. I saved your life. That does not mean I belong to it." Silence filled the line for a long second. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. Not angry. Measured. "Lily, you do not belong to my life. But you are connected to it now. There is a difference." I leaned against the cool hallway wall, trying to steady myself. "And when does that connection end?" I asked. His answer came without hesitation. "When I am certain you are no longer at risk." The certainty in his tone unsettled me more than any raised voice could have. I had stepped forward for a second. Just one whisper. And now my world was moving on a different set of rules. I should have felt safer knowing someone powerful had decided to protect me. But safety is complicated when it comes wrapped in tinted windows and quiet men who never blink. After my last class ended that afternoon, I walked outside and found the same black sedan waiting near the curb. Students laughed around me, complaining about homework and weekend plans, completely unaware that my shadow now had its own security detail. I slid into the back seat without arguing this time. The driver nodded once and pulled into traffic. My phone buzzed almost immediately. "Adrian, you left campus alone," he said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. "I walked 20 feet, I replied. "To the car you sent." A pause. "Patterns matter," he said calmly. "If someone is watching, they test distance first." His world spoke in measurements I was still learning to understand. "I cannot live like this forever," I said, staring at the skyline as we crossed back into Queens. "I do not expect you to," he answered. "But I expect you to listen." The car slowed in front of my apartment building, but this time another vehicle was parked behind it. Different driver. Same dark windows. My chest tightened. "Is that necessary too?" I asked. "For now," he said. "You were seen speaking to me. That has weight." I stepped onto the sidewalk, feeling the afternoon air press against my skin. It was barely 60 degrees, but I felt overheated. My building suddenly looked smaller, more fragile than it had the night before. "You cannot just station people outside my home," I said quietly. "My neighbors will notice. They will assume you are dating someone important," he replied. There was the faintest trace of humor in his tone. I did not laugh. "I am not," I said firmly. Silence lingered on the line before he answered. "No," he agreed. "You are not." The words carried something I could not name. Disappointment. Relief. I could not tell. I climbed the stairs and entered my apartment, setting my backpack down on the small kitchen table. The black sedan was visible from my window again. Constant. Watching. My phone vibrated once more. A text this time. A photo of the restaurant from the previous night, empty and pristine as if nothing had happened. Beneath it, a single sentence. "Things are being handled." My pulse skipped. Handled how? I typed back before I could stop. "Myself." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then his reply. Quietly. I exhaled slowly. He was not a man who offered explanations easily. I moved to the sink and washed my hands, even though they were clean. The memory of that flicker of metal under a jacket replayed in my mind like a warning sign I could not unsee. My life used to revolve around class schedules and tip percentages. Now it revolved around risk assessments and patterns. My phone rang again. I answered without checking the number. "Lily," Adrian said, his voice lower than before. "I need you to trust that I do not involve civilians lightly." "I am not a civilian in your world," I replied. "I am collateral." The word hung between us. Heavy. "No," he said firmly. "You are not collateral. You are the reason I am still here." His certainty unsettled me more than fear ever could. I moved to the window and watched the men below. They were not just guarding me. They were anchoring me to something larger. "And when this is over?" I asked softly. His answer came without hesitation. "Then you go back to your life." I swallowed. Because the part he did not say out loud was the part one already understood. My life might never feel the same again. The next morning, the black sedan was gone. For a split second, relief rushed through me so fast it made me dizzy. The curb in front of my building looked ordinary again. No tinted windows. No silent engine. Just a delivery truck double parked and Mrs. Alvarez from 3B walking her small white dog. I told myself this was what I wanted. Normal. Invisible. I made coffee in my tiny kitchen and stood by the window longer than necessary, half expecting the car to reappear like a shadow stepping back into place. It did not. My phone stayed quiet too. No calls. No texts. The silence felt intentional. By noon, I convinced myself it was over. Maybe whatever threat Adrian had been worried about had faded. Maybe his world had shifted back into balance without pulling mine further in. I went to work that evening at the restaurant, tying my apron with steady hands. The manager pulled me aside before my shift started. "We have new security protocols," he said carefully. "Private request." I did not need to ask whose request. 2 unfamiliar men stood near the entrance, dressed in suits that did not match the usual staff. They did not look at me directly, but I felt the awareness in the room. Adrian was not there, but his presence was. My shift moved slowly. Every time the door opened, my pulse jumped. Every time a man in a dark jacket crossed the dining room, I noticed. I hated that I noticed. Around 8:30, my phone buzzed in the pocket of my apron. A message from an unknown number. "He is not finished." My breath caught. I stared at the words until they blurred. No name. No context. Just that sentence. My hands went cold. I stepped into the hallway near the kitchen and dialed Adrian's number without thinking. He answered on the first ring. "Tell me," he said immediately, as if he already sensed something was wrong. I read the message aloud. There was no change in his breathing, no sign of alarm. Just a quiet pause. "Forward it to me," he said. "Now." I did. Within seconds, my phone chimed again. This time it was from him. "Stay inside. I am coming." My heart pounded against my ribs. "Adrian, I do not want this to escalate," I whispered, keeping my voice low so no one would overhear. "It will not," he replied. "But you will not ignore it either." 10 minutes later, the restaurant door opened, and he walked in. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just controlled. Conversations softened around him the way they always did. He did not look at me right away. He spoke quietly to the new security at the entrance, then crossed the dining room with measured steps. When his eyes finally met mine, something in his expression had shifted. not fear. Focus. This is not random, he said softly once we stood near the service station. Someone wants you unsettled. It worked, I admitted. He studied my face for a long second. That ends now, he said. The certainty in his voice wrapped around me like armor and a cage at the same time. You said this would be temporary, I reminded him. His jaw tightened slightly. It will be, he said. But until I know who sent that message, you do not walk alone. Not to class. Not home. Not even across this dining room. I swallowed, realizing something uncomfortable and undeniable. The threat was no longer abstract, and neither was the connection between us. He did not leave after he said that. Adrian stayed at the restaurant for the rest of my shift, seated at a corner table with a clear view of every entrance and exit. He did not order much. Just black coffee that went untouched and a glass of water he never finished. But his presence changed the room. Staff moved more carefully. Conversations dipped lower. Even the lighting felt sharper, as if the chandeliers were aware of him. I tried to focus on my tables, on memorizing orders and calculating tips, but I felt the gravity of his attention every time I crossed the dining room. Not possessive, not intrusive, protective, and that might have been worse. When my shift ended at 10, I untied my apron with slower fingers than usual. I told myself I would walk out alone, prove to both of us that I was still capable of living without an escort. But when I stepped into the hallway near the lockers, he was already there. Waiting. You are finished, he said softly. It was not a question. I nodded. I can go home by myself, I replied, lifting my chin slightly. He studied me the way he always did when I pushed back, as if recalculating something invisible. You could, he agreed, but you will not. Frustration sparked in my chest. You cannot control every variable, I said. No, he answered calmly. Only the ones that matter. We walked out together, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth from his shoulder through the thin fabric of my sweater. Outside, the air had cooled to just above 50 degrees. The city hummed with late-night traffic and distant sirens that blended into background noise. The black sedan waited at the curb again, engine running. I stopped before getting in. Who sent that message? I asked quietly. His jaw tightened slightly. Someone who wants to see how you react under pressure. And how did I react? I pressed. He looked down at me then, eyes steady. You called me. The words landed between us, heavier than they should have. He was right. I had not called the police. I had not ignored it. I had called him. The realization unsettled me more than the message itself. That does not mean I trust your world, I said. It means I do not understand it. A faint shift crossed his expression. Not irritation. Respect. You are not supposed to understand it, he said. You are supposed to survive it. The driver opened the rear door. This time, Adrian slid in beside me instead of taking the front seat. The space felt smaller instantly. Not threatening. Intense. He did not invade my space, but the awareness between us was undeniable. As the car pulled away from the curb, city lights flickered across his face, highlighting the sharp lines and the quiet calculation behind his eyes. You should not have to adjust your life because of my enemies, he said after a moment. But I will not apologize for keeping you safe. I watched my reflection in the tinted window, superimposed over his. Two different worlds layered on top of each other. And what happens if I decide I do not want this protection? I asked. He turned slightly toward me, voice low but unwavering. Then I will respect your decision, he said. A beat passed. After I eliminate the risk. The certainty in his tone told me something I was only beginning to accept. This was no longer about one night or one message. The line between his world and mine had blurred. And whether I liked it or not, we were both standing on it together. There is a difference between feeling protected and feeling claimed. And that night in the back of his car, I started to understand how thin that line really was. The city blurred past the tinted windows, streaks of red and white lights reflecting across the glass like restless thoughts. Adrian sat beside me, close but not touching, his presence steady and deliberate. He did not fill the silence with unnecessary words. He never did. Where are we going? I asked when we passed the turn that led toward my apartment. He did not look surprised that I noticed. Somewhere quieter, he replied. You have been reacting for days. I would prefer you think clearly. The car slowed in front of a private townhouse on the Upper East Side, all stone facade and tall iron gates. It did not look like a fortress. It looked like restraint. The driver stepped out first, scanning the sidewalk before opening our door. I hesitated. "This is not my home," I said quietly. Adrian's gaze softened just slightly. "No," he agreed. "It is mine." Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and espresso. Clean lines. Dark wood. No clutter. The kind of place where everything had intention. He gestured toward a seating area near the tall windows. "Sit," he said, not commanding, simply inviting. I remained standing for a second longer before lowering myself onto the edge of the couch. My heart was not racing anymore. It was steady, alert. "You brought me here to calm me down," I said. "Or to convince me." A faint shadow of a smile touched his mouth. "I do not convince," he replied. "I present truth." He poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to me. Our fingers brushed briefly. The contact was accidental, but the awareness lingered. "The message you received," he began, sitting across from me instead of beside me, "was sent from a device purchased 2 hours after the incident at the restaurant. Disposable. Untraceable after one use." I tightened my grip on the glass. "So you cannot find him?" "Not yet," he corrected. The confidence in that phrase unsettled me in a different way. "And until you do?" I asked. He leaned back slightly, studying me with that same careful attention he had shown from the first night. "Until I do, you remain visible to me and invisible to them." "Invisible," I repeated. He nodded. "No routine changes posted online. No walking alone. No predictable patterns." His world ran on calculations. Mine had run on hope. I set the glass down. "You talk about this like it is temporary," I said. "But every step I take now is measured against your enemies." He did not deny it. "Because you chose to step between me and danger," he said quietly. "That choice has weight." The room felt smaller suddenly, not because of the walls, but because of the truth in his voice. I stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the quiet street below. "What if I had said nothing?" I asked. "What if I let your world handle itself?" His answer came without hesitation. "Then I would not be sitting here with you." I turned back to face him. There was no arrogance in his expression, no dramatics, just fact. "And you regret that?" I pressed. He held my gaze steadily. "No," the single word shifted something inside me. Not fear, not relief, something deeper. I realized then that this was no longer just about protection or threats or messages sent from disposable phones. It was about the moment I chose to speak and the moment he chose to listen. And in the quiet of that townhouse, with the city lights flickering outside, I understood that neither of us had walked away unchanged. The silence in that townhouse lingered long after his last words settled between us. I should have left. I should have thanked him for the water, for the explanation, for the temporary protection, and asked the driver to take me back to Queens. Instead, I stayed standing near the window, watching my reflection blend with the city lights outside. "You built all of this," I said quietly, turning back toward him. It was not admiration. It was observation. Adrian followed my gaze around the room, taking in the dark wood shelves, the clean architecture, the quiet control in every detail. "I inherited some of it," he replied. "I rebuilt the rest." There was no pride in his tone, just fact. I folded my arms across my chest, trying to anchor myself. "And how many people look at you the way I do right now?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly. "Suspicious." I shook my head. "Like you are human." The words surprised even me. A faint shift passed across his expression, subtle but real. "Not many," he admitted. The honesty in that admission unsettled me more than any guarded response could have. My phone vibrated in my pocket, sharp and sudden in the quiet room. My heart jumped before I could stop it. I pulled it out slowly. Unknown number again. A single message. "You are closer than you think." My throat tightened. I did not need to show him for him to notice the change in my face. He stood immediately, crossing the room with controlled urgency. "Give it to me," he said, holding out his hand. I placed the phone in his palm. His jaw hardened as he read the screen, but his voice remained steady. "This is escalation," he murmured. "They are trying to provoke a reaction." "From you?" I said. "Or from me?" He looked up at that, eyes sharp. "From both." The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. "You said I would be invisible," I whispered. "You said I would not be part of this." He handed the phone back to me carefully, as if it were fragile. "You are not part of my operations," he said firmly. "But you are part of my priorities." The distinction was clear in his mind. It was less clear in mine. I walked a few steps away, needing distance to think. If they are trying to get to you through me, then I am the weakness, I said. The word tasted bitter. Adrian's response was immediate. No, he said, voice lower now. You are the reason I am cautious. I turned back toward him. That is not the same thing. He held my gaze without blinking. It is to me. The certainty in his tone did not feel possessive. It felt deliberate, like a decision already made. Outside, a car passed slowly along the street, headlights sliding across the walls before fading. The world continued as if nothing had shifted. But inside that townhouse, something had. You should go home tonight, he said after a long moment. But not alone. I almost laughed. Of course not alone. He stepped closer, stopping just short of invading my space. Lily, look at me, he said quietly. I did. You stepped forward once because you trusted your instinct, he continued. Trust it again. Do not let fear rewrite it. I swallowed hard, realizing he was not just protecting me from his enemies. He was trying to protect something in me from changing. And that realization was more dangerous than any message from an unknown number. By the time he walked me back to the car, the city felt different. Not louder, not darker, just aware. Like it had been watching the entire conversation through the tall townhouse windows. Adrian did not touch me as we stepped onto the sidewalk, but the space between us carried weight. The driver opened the door, and this time I slid in without hesitation. I was tired of pretending I could outrun something I did not fully understand. He joined me in the back seat again, his posture straight, his gaze scanning the street before the door closed. They are pushing, he said quietly as the car pulled away from the curb. Messages like that are not meant to harm. They are meant to destabilize. I leaned my head back against the leather seat. It is working, I admitted. I feel like I am waiting for something that has not happened yet. He glanced at me, expression unreadable. Anticipation is a tactic, he replied. It forces mistakes. And you do not make mistakes? I asked, unable to stop myself. A faint breath of amusement left him. I made one, he said. I underestimated how quickly they would notice you. The admission landed softly, but it mattered. He did not blame me. He blamed himself. The car merged onto the bridge toward Queens, the skyline shrinking behind us. I watched it through the window and wondered if I would ever look at it the same way again. My phone remained silent in my hand, but I could still feel the phantom vibration from that last message. You said I was not collateral, I said after a moment. Then what am I? The question lingered between us longer than I expected. When he answered, his voice was lower. You are someone who acted without calculating the cost, he said. That is rare. I turned toward him fully now. That is not an answer. He held my gaze steadily. You are my responsibility. The words settled into my chest like a stone. Not possession. Not romance. Responsibility. That sounds like control, I said carefully. It is protection, he corrected. Control would mean limiting your choices. Protection means preserving them. I did not respond right away. The distinction mattered to him. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened slightly, in the way he chose each word with precision. The car stopped in front of my building again. This time, only one vehicle remained nearby. Fewer visible guards. Subtle adjustments. You adapt quickly, I observed. I have to, he replied. So do you. I reached for the door handle, but paused. If they send another message? I asked. You call me, he said immediately. No hesitation. No doubt. Even if it is 3 in the morning. The certainty in his voice made something in my chest shift again. Not fear. Not exactly comfort either. Something steadier. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the night air cool against my skin. He remained seated for a second longer before following me out, walking me to the building entrance. The porch light flickered faintly above us. Ordinary. Fragile. I turned to face him fully under that weak glow. You cannot guard me forever, I said softly. He looked at me like he had already considered that outcome. No, he agreed. But I can make sure you are still here when this ends. His hand hovered near my elbow for a brief second, not touching, just close enough to steady if needed. Then he stepped back. Lock your door, he said quietly. I nodded and entered the building, climbing the narrow stairs with my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear anymore. When I reached my apartment and locked the door behind me, I leaned against it and closed my eyes. Somewhere outside, a car engine hummed. Not distant, not intrusive, present. And for the first time since that night in the restaurant, I realized something I had not wanted to admit. I was no longer just reacting to his world. I was choosing to stay in it. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. Not because of noise. Because of awareness. There is a difference. Noise startles you. Awareness keeps you alert, even in silence. I lay on my futon staring at the ceiling, listening for something I could not name. The radiator clicked softly. A car passed outside. Nothing unusual. And yet I knew, without checking, that someone was still parked at the curb. Not hovering. Not obvious. Just present. I rolled onto my side and reached for my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. The quiet felt intentional again. Like the pause between moves in a chess game I had never agreed to play. I showered quickly and dressed for work, choosing a simple navy sweater and dark jeans. No jewelry. No distractions. When I stepped outside, the sedan was there, but farther down the block this time. Subtle. Adaptive. The driver gave a short nod when I made eye contact. I surprised myself by nodding back. At the restaurant, everything looked normal. White tablecloths. Polished glasses. The faint scent of espresso drifting from the bar. But normal had become a surface-level illusion. I noticed every new face. Every hesitation in a stranger's movement. My instincts were sharper now. Not panicked. Calibrated. Around noon, my manager pulled me aside. "Private booking tonight," he said quietly. "Full dining room. Requested by Mr. Cole." My pulse shifted. Not fear. Recognition. "All right," I replied evenly. That evening, the restaurant transformed. Security was discreet but layered. Guests were carefully screened. Adrian arrived just after 7, alone this time. No visible entourage at his table. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like it had been tailored that morning. He looked controlled, composed, untouched by tension. But when his eyes found mine across the room, there was something else there. Decision. I approached his table with a steady hand. "Good evening," I said, keeping my tone professional. He gave a slight incline of his head. "Lily." He did not need a menu. He did not need to order. This was not about dinner. "Why here?" I asked quietly while pouring water. He waited until I finished before answering. "Because this is where you made your choice," he said. And I prefer to respond where it began. The words settled deeper than I expected. "Respond how?" I asked. His gaze softened, just slightly. "By removing the variable." I straightened. "The person sending the messages?" He nodded once. "Identified." My breath caught. "And?" I pressed. His voice remained calm. "Handled." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. I studied his expression, searching for something darker. Something ruthless. Instead, I saw precision. Closure. "So it is over?" I asked carefully. He held my gaze for a long moment. "The thread is," he said. "But the connection is not." The room felt warmer suddenly, the soft lighting casting shadows that felt intimate rather than tense. "You said you would respect my choice," I reminded him. "I will," he replied immediately. "Which is why I am here alone." That mattered. More than I wanted it to. He was not surrounding me with force. He was standing in front of me as a man. Not a boss. Not a shadow. "Then hear mine," I said quietly. "I do not want to be hidden or guarded like an asset." His jaw tightened slightly at the word. "You are not an asset," he said firmly. "Then what am I?" I asked again. This time, he did not hesitate. "Someone I trust." The simplicity of it disarmed me. Trust was not a word thrown around lightly in his world. I could hear that in the way he said it. I set the water pitcher down slowly. The dining room buzzed around us, unaware of the shift happening at table 14. "Trust goes both ways," I said softly. He nodded. "Then trust that I do not mistake." Obligation for interest. My heart stilled at that. There it was. Not possession. Not debt. Interest. Real. Intentional. And for the first time since that night, I realized something else had changed. The danger may have been addressed. But what stood between us now was not fear. It was choice. When he said interest, something inside me steadied instead of spiraled. I finished my shift in a blur of quiet focus, aware of him at table 14, but no longer on edge. He did not rush me. He did not demand my attention. He sat there like a man who understood patience, who understood that real decisions are not forced under pressure. When the last guests left and the chairs were stacked on tables, I untied my apron slowly and walked toward him without being asked. The restaurant was dim now, only the wall sconces casting warm pools of light across polished floors. "You said the thread is handled," I said softly, stopping a few feet from his table. He stood, meeting me at eye level instead of towering over me. Yes, he replied. There will be no more messages. I searched his face for hesitation and found none. And the men outside my building? I asked. Gone, he said. As of tomorrow morning. The air shifted in my lungs. Freedom should have felt immediate. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something new. You could have kept them there, I said. You could have decided I was safer that way. His gaze did not waver. Safety without consent is control, he answered. I do not confuse the two. The distinction mattered. More than he probably realized. I folded my arms lightly, not defensive, just grounding myself. And now? I asked. He stepped closer, stopping just short of my personal space. Close enough that I could see the faint silver at his temples again. Close enough that his presence felt intentional rather than overwhelming. Now you return to your life, he said. If that is what you want. The choice hung between us. Not dramatic. Not urgent. Just real. I thought about my apartment in Queens. My classes. My shifts. The quiet rhythm I had before all of this began. Then I thought about the moment in the restaurant when I leaned close and whispered for him to stay still. I had not calculated that choice. I had trusted something instinctive and immediate. And if I do not want to pretend this never happened? I asked quietly. Something in his expression shifted, subtle but undeniable. Then we do not pretend, he replied. There was no pressure in his tone, no demand, just openness. I am not part of your world, I said. I do not understand your alliances or your risks. You do not need to, he answered. I do not need you to stand beside my operations. I need you to stand beside me. The words settled deep. Not flashy, not theatrical, honest. I looked around the empty restaurant, the place where everything changed. If I step into this, I said slowly, it is because I choose you, not because I owe you. He nodded once. I would accept nothing less. The certainty in his voice was not about ownership. It was about respect. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Taxis passed. Streetlights flickered. Life continued. But inside that quiet room, something steadier took shape. One dinner, I said finally. No security. No shadows. Just you. A faint smile touched his mouth, restrained but genuine. Tomorrow, he agreed. He offered his hand, not to claim, not to pull, but to ask. I placed mine in his. Warm, steady, intentional. And for the first time since that night, I realized the fear had faded completely. What remained was choice. And I was ready to make it. The next evening, I walked into the restaurant as a guest instead of an employee for the first time in my life. No apron. No notepad. No scanning tables for refills. Just a simple black dress that fell to my knees and a steady heartbeat that felt different from fear. The city air was cool, just under 60 degrees, and for once there was no sedan idling at the curb, no visible security positioned across the street. I noticed the absence immediately. So did he. Adrian was already inside when I stepped through the doors. Not at table 14. Not in the center of the room. He had chosen a small table near the window, quieter, less visible. When he stood, it was not with authority. It was with intention. You came, he said softly. I said I would, I replied. The simplicity of it felt grounding. He pulled out the chair for me, not as a performance, but as a gesture. The dining room buzzed gently around us, the clink of glasses and low conversations blending into something almost peaceful. For the first time since that night, I was not watching for threats. I was watching him. He looked different without the weight of urgency in his posture. Still composed, still powerful, but human in a way that did not demand distance. No guards. I asked lightly. He shook his head. Not where you can see them, he admitted, honesty first. I smiled faintly. That is close enough. Dinner unfolded slowly. Real conversation this time. He asked about my classes, about why I chose accounting instead of something easier. I asked about how he rebuilt what he inherited, about what it means to lead without raising his voice. There were no dramatic confessions, no grand gestures, just two people navigating the space between different worlds. At one point, he paused and studied me in the quiet way he always did. You are not afraid anymore, he observed. I considered that carefully. I am aware, I said, but I am not afraid. He nodded once, as if that answer mattered more than anything else I could have said. After dinner, we stepped outside together. The streetlights cast soft gold across the sidewalk. The city moved around us, unaware of the shift that had taken place inside me. This is where it becomes real, I said quietly. Not because of danger, but because of choice. He stepped closer, leaving just enough space for me to step back if I wanted to. I did not. Then choose, he said. No pressure, no urgency, just an open door. I looked up at him and thought about the girl who whispered for him to stay still, who acted on instinct without calculating the cost. That girl was still here. She had not been erased by fear or overshadowed by power. She had grown sharper, steadier. I choose to stand beside you, I said slowly. Not behind you, not protected from you, beside you. Something shifted in his expression, something rare and unguarded. He offered his hand again, just like the night before. This time, when I placed mine in his, it felt different. Not a rescue, not a debt, a partnership. The city lights reflected in his eyes as he spoke, voice low and certain. Then we moved forward together. And as we walked down that sidewalk side by side, I realized something simple and unshakable. He ruled the city. But that night, I ruled the choice that changed both of us.